The heat shimmered off the asphalt, turning the distant pines into a watery mirage. For 8-year-old Lily, the world had shrunk to the rhythmic tick of the hazard lights and the sour smell of hot rubber from the flat tire. Her mother, face pale with exhaustion and stress, was on the phone, her voice a thin, frayed wire of sound trying to connect with a tow service that seemed to exist only in theory. Lily clutched the worn strap of her purple backpack, her knuckles white. It was her house, her fortress, her entire world compressed into a zippered nylon shell. She sat on the dusty shoulder of the 2-lane highway, her small sneakers tucked beneath her, trying to make herself as small as possible. Every car that roared past was a monster, a gust of wind and noise that threatened to swallow her whole. Then, a new sound began to build from far down the road. It wasn't the singular whoosh of a car, but a low, guttural rumble, a vibration that started in the soles of her shoes and worked its way up into her chest. It grew steadily, a gathering storm of synchronized thunder. Lily's eyes widened as they appeared over the rise, a V formation of chrome and black leather cutting through the heat haze. 10 motorcycles, maybe more, moving with a disciplined grace that was both beautiful and terrifying. They slowed as they approached the stranded car, their engines dropping to a throaty, percussive idle. The men on the bikes were large, dressed in worn leather vests adorned with patches she couldn't read. They wore their histories on their faces, lines etched by sun and wind, beards that seemed to hold stories, and eyes that missed nothing. Her mother ended her call, her posture stiffening with a fear Lily knew well. It was the fear of the unknown, of vulnerability made manifest. The lead rider, a man built like a mountain with a gray-streaked beard and kind, tired eyes, swung a leg over his bike and walked toward them. His boots crunched on the gravel, a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the sudden quiet. He stopped a respectful distance away, removing his sunglasses. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low baritone, calm and steady. "Looks like you've got some trouble." Lily's mother, Sarah, managed a tight nod. "A flat. I've been on hold for an hour." "Roadside service out here is a joke," the man said, his gaze briefly flicking to Lily before returning to her mother. He was careful not to stare, not to intimidate. "We can have that changed for you in 10 minutes. Got a spare?" Relief and suspicion warred on Sarah's face. Another man, leaner and with intricate tattoos covering his arms, was already walking toward the back of their car, his movements efficient and practiced. Yes, in the trunk." The big man smiled faintly. "Good. Silas will get right on it." He then looked at Lily again, a softer expression on his face. "It's hot out here. We've got cold water." He gestured with his thumb back toward the bikes, where another member was already pulling bottles from a saddlebag. Lily pressed herself closer to the guardrail, her backpack held tight against her chest. She didn't want their water. She didn't want their help. She just wanted to be invisible. The man seemed to understand. He didn't push. He just stood there, a silent, watchful guardian, while his men worked with quiet competence. The jack was placed, the lug nuts were loosened, and the ruined tire was pulled free. It all happened without shouting, without wasted motion. It was like watching a well-oiled machine. The man who had offered water approached, holding out a bottle. He stopped several feet away from Lily, bent down to one knee and set it on the ground between them. "For when you're thirsty," he said softly, and then retreated. Lily stared at the bottle. Condensation traced clean lines through the road dust on its plastic surface. It looked impossibly cold, impossibly kind. But kindness was a currency she had learned to be wary of. Kindness often came with a price, a hook hidden beneath the bait. She stayed perfectly still, her gaze fixed on the men changing the tire. The spare was on, the lug nuts tightened with a torque wrench one of them produced from a tool roll. The whole operation took less than 12 minutes. Silas, the mechanic, wiped his hands on a rag and gave Sarah a nod. "All set, ma'am. That spare should get you to town, but you'll want to get a proper tire on there as soon as you can." Sarah's face was a mess of gratitude. "Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. Can I pay you? I don't have much cash, but—" The big man held up a hand. "No, ma'am, not necessary. We're just glad we could help." His eyes found Lily again. She was still sitting by the guardrail, small and defiant. He walked over slowly, his shadow falling over her. "You staying safe, little one?" Lily just stared at him, her chin tucked down. "That's a heavy-looking bag for a little girl," he said gently. "Let me help you carry it to the car." He reached for the strap. Instantly, Lily recoiled, scrambling backward on the gravel. "No!" The word was sharp, a shard of glass in the hot, still air. She hugged the backpack so tightly it must have hurt her ribs. "It's mine. You can't have it." The man froze, his hand hovering in midair. He pulled it back as if burned. The other bikers who had been mounting their machines went still. The friendly, helpful atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a sudden, razor-sharp tension. They didn't understand her fear. They saw a child reacting with what seemed like irrational panic. But the lead rider, the man they called Bear, saw something else. He saw a terror that was old and deep, a protective instinct that had been forged in a fire he couldn't see. He knelt down again, making himself smaller, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Hey, it's okay, I'm not going to take it," he said, his gaze steady and patient. "I promise. But your mom needs you in the car now. It's not safe here on the road." Lily's eyes darted from his face to her mother, who was watching with a worried frown. She knew he was right. She had to get in the car. But letting go of the bag felt like letting go of her own skin. With trembling hands, she tried to stand up while still clutching it, but the weight and awkwardness made her stumble. The top zipper, already strained, gave way. The backpack fell open, spilling its contents onto the dusty gravel at the biker's feet, and he froze. He didn't just stop moving. It was as if the world itself had stopped turning, because what tumbled out wasn't what he expected. There were no dolls, no coloring books, no toys. Instead, there was a startlingly organized collection of survival gear. 2 bottles of water, a Ziploc bag containing a half-eaten sleeve of crackers and 3 granola bars, a small, travel-sized first aid kit, a tightly rolled-up sweatshirt, a flashlight, the small, silver kind, and a single, spiral-bound notebook with a worn, crayon-decorated cover. It had flipped open as it fell. The page was filled with a child's drawing. It depicted a smiling stick figure of a man standing next to a smaller stick figure of a girl. The man's smile was wide and friendly, but his hands were drawn as long, black, grasping shadows that reached for the little girl, who had no smile at all. Beneath the drawing, in shaky first-grade letters, was a single word: helper. Bear stared at the drawing, and the air went cold despite the oppressive heat. Every protective instinct in his body screamed. This wasn't just a child's backpack. It was a go bag, an escape kit. And this wasn't just a drawing, it was a warning. A silent cry for help from a child who had learned that words were not enough. He looked up from the drawing to Lily's face, and in her wide, terrified eyes, he saw the truth of the picture. The man with the shadowy hands was real. Lily's world had been shrinking for 6 months, ever since her father had died in a workplace accident. The light had gone out of their small house, replaced by the pale, flickering glow of a television her mother was too tired to watch. Sarah, once vibrant and full of laughter, was now a ghost haunting her own life, working double shifts as a nurse just to keep their heads above the tide of bills and grief. They had to sell their home, the only one Lily had ever known, and move to the small, unfamiliar town of Northwood, where the rent was cheaper and the loneliness was thicker. The new apartment was small and smelled of stale paint. Their boxes remained unpacked, monuments to a life they hadn't had the energy to rebuild. Lily became an expert in silence. She learned the specific cadence of her mother's exhausted footsteps, the soft click of the door when she left for the hospital before dawn, the weary sigh when she returned long after the sun had set. Lily learned to make her own breakfast, a bowl of dry cereal eaten while standing at the kitchen counter. She learned to be quiet, to not ask for things, to not be a burden. Her mother's sadness was a fragile thing, a glass sculpture Lily was afraid of shattering with a single misplaced need. School was a sea of unfamiliar faces. She was the new girl, the quiet one. She ate her lunch alone, her back against the brick wall of the gymnasium, watching the other children play games with rules she didn't understand. Her teacher, Miss Albright, was kind but perpetually overwhelmed by a class of 30 children. She would give Lily's shoulder a brief, encouraging squeeze, but there was always another student demanding her attention, another small fire to put out. Lily was not a fire, she was a flicker, a wisp of smoke easy to overlook. The real problem was the afternoons. Sarah's nursing shifts were unpredictable, often running late into the evening. The solution was the Northwood Community Youth Center, an after-school program run by a man named Mr. Abernathy. On the surface, he was the town's gentle giant, a pillar of the community, everyone said. He had a warm, booming laugh and a smile that seemed to reach his eyes. He gave out cookies and organized games. Parents trusted him implicitly. He was a lifesaver for single mothers like Sarah. But Lily saw the shadows. It started with small things. Mr. Abernathy had a special name for her, Little Sparrow. He said it was because she was so quiet and watchful. At first, it felt nice to be noticed, but then his noticing became heavy. He would single her out for special tasks. While the other kids played outside, he would ask her to stay in and help him organize his office. The office was small and windowless, filled with stacks of paper and the scent of old coffee. The door always clicked shut behind them. "You're my best helper, Little Sparrow," he would say, his voice a low, syrupy rumble. He would stand too close, his large frame blocking the light from the hallway. He never touched her, not in a way anyone else would see as wrong. It was a hand on her shoulder that lingered too long, a pat on the head that felt more like a claim than an affection. He would ask her questions about her mom, about their apartment, about whether she got lonely at night. His interest felt like a creeping vine, wrapping around her, squeezing the air from her lungs. One afternoon, he was telling her a story, and he knelt down in front of her, his face close to hers. His smile was wide, but his eyes were like two dark, empty holes. It was then that she saw the hands. In the dim light of the office, his hands seemed to stretch, his fingers elongating into dark, grasping tendrils of shadow on the wall behind him. It was just a trick of the light, a child's overactive imagination, perhaps. But the feeling it produced in her was cold and real. It was a primal fear, a deep, instinctual knowledge that this man, this helper, was not safe. From that day on, she began to build her fortress. Her purple backpack, a birthday gift from her father the year before, became her sanctuary. It started with the flashlight. She took it from the kitchen drawer, a small silver tube that felt like a sword in her hand. If the lights went out, if she was trapped in the dark, she would have her own sun. Then came the food. She started saving parts of her school lunch, a granola bar, a bag of crackers, tucking them away in a side pocket. It was her emergency supply, a guarantee that she would not have to rely on anyone else. The water bottles followed, then the small first aid kit from her mother's car. The sweatshirt was for warmth, a shield against the cold feeling that settled in her bones whenever Mr. Abernathy called her Little Sparrow. The notebook was the last piece. It was where she put the things she couldn't say out loud. She wasn't good with words, but she could draw. She drew her old house with its big sunny windows. She drew her father, a smiling stick figure with a halo. And she drew Mr. Abernathy. She tried to draw his kind smile, the one everyone else saw, but she could never get it right. Instead, she drew what she felt. She drew the grasping, shadowy hands. She drew the small, sad girl standing beside him. She drew the closed door of the office. It was her testimony, a secret map of her fear. The bag was her plan. It was her escape. If things got too bad, if the shadows ever fully detached from the wall, she would run. She would take her bag and she would walk until she found a place with light. She never told her mother. How could she? Her mother already carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. Adding this fear, this ugly, formless thing, felt like an act of cruelty. So Lily stayed silent, clutching her purple backpack. A tiny soldier guarding a border no one else could see. The flat tire on the side of that lonely highway was not just an inconvenience, it was a breach in her defenses. It had stranded her in the open, exposed and vulnerable, and brought her face to face with a new group of large, intimidating men. But when her fortress finally spilled open, it was not judgment she saw in the lead biker's eyes. It was a terrifying, absolute understanding. The sons of Odin were not a gang. They were a brotherhood, forged not in crime, but in shared trauma and a rigid, unspoken code. Most of them were veterans, men who had seen the worst of humanity in dusty, sun-scorched landscapes far from home. They had come back to a world that no longer made sense, a world of quiet suburbs and meaningless routines that felt alien and suffocating. The rumble of a Harley-Davidson was the only thing that could drown out the noise in their heads. The road was the only church that offered them solace. Marcus, known to everyone as Bear, was their president. He had been a Marine sergeant, a man responsible for the lives of scared, brave young men. He carried that responsibility still, not as a burden, but as his defining purpose. He had seen firsthand what happened when the strong preyed on the weak, when innocence was treated as a commodity. He had a daughter of his own, a grown woman with a family now, but he could still remember the fierce, primal terror he felt whenever she scraped her knee, the overwhelming urge to place himself between her and all the world's dangers. That instinct had never faded. It had only broadened. Now, every vulnerable child was his daughter. The clubhouse wasn't a den of illicit activity. It was a sanctuary. It was a converted auto body shop on the industrial edge of town, smelling of grease, coffee, and old leather. Inside, men who struggled with nightmares and phantom pains found a place to belong. Silas, the club's road captain and master mechanic, could diagnose a faulty engine by sound alone. He found a peace in the logic of machinery that the chaotic human world denied him. He had been a combat medic, and his hands, now stained with engine oil, had once worked desperately to hold lives together. Cole, the quiet, watchful one, had been a scout sniper. He rarely spoke, but he saw everything. His silence was not empty. It was a constant state of assessment, a habit of vigilance he could not turn off. Their code was simple and uncompromising. They were loyal to the Brotherhood, they respected their machines, and they protected the innocent. This last rule was their bedrock. It was the reason they organized charity toy drives at Christmas and stood as a silent, intimidating honor guard at the funerals of fallen soldiers. It was why they had a reputation among local law enforcement as a strange but predictable entity. They caused no trouble, but they finished any trouble that came their way, especially if it involved a woman or a child in distress. The ride that day had been a wind therapy run, a chance to clear their heads on the open road. They were heading back from a memorial for a fallen brother in a neighboring state. The mood was somber, reflective. They rode in a tight, disciplined formation, a rolling bulwark of steel and leather. They were not looking for trouble. They were simply moving through the world, occupying their own space. When they saw the stranded car, there was no discussion. Bear simply signaled, and the entire formation slowed and pulled over. It was automatic, an ingrained reflex. A civilian in need, especially a woman with a child, was not someone you passed by. It was a matter of principle. The world was a chaotic, often cruel place. A flat tire was a small tear in the fabric of someone's day, and they had the tools and the skill to patch it. It was a simple act of order in a disorderly world. Bear's initial approach was textbook. He kept his distance, removed his sunglasses to show his eyes, and kept his voice calm and even. He knew how they looked to outsiders. A pack of wolves descending on a wounded doe. His job was to immediately de-escalate that perception, to show that their presence was one of aid, not threat. He saw the mother's fear, and he saw the child's even deeper terror. He recognized it. It was the look of a creature that has learned to expect the worst from the world. He watched his men work, their movements economical and sure. He felt a quiet pride in their competence. They were good men, broken in their own ways, but good. The offer of water was another standard procedure, a small gesture of peace, an offering that asked for nothing in return. He expected the little girl, Lily, to be shy. He did not expect the visceral, absolute panic that seized her when he offered to help with her bag. When the backpack fell open, time slowed. For a moment, Bear's mind struggled to process the scene. The scattered content seemed random, a child's mismatched treasures. But then his training, his experience, his entire life's worth of observation clicked into place. The organized supplies, the flashlight, the emergency food. This was not a collection, it was a kit. It was what a soldier packed before going on patrol. It was what a refugee carried when fleeing a war zone. It was a bag packed by someone who did not feel safe in their own life. Then his eyes landed on the notebook. The drawing. The smiling man with the long, dark, grasping hands. He had seen drawings like it before, in pamphlets at veterans' support centers, in articles about trauma therapy. Children drew what they could not say. The shadows were not a literal depiction, they were a feeling. They were the shape of fear. The word helper written underneath was the final, chilling piece of the puzzle. The source of this child's terror was not some random monster, it was someone posing as a protector, someone trusted. In that instant, the quiet highway shoulder became a battlefield. The enemy was unseen, but Bear knew he was real. The mission parameters snapped into focus with cold, hard clarity. Objective 1, secure the child. Objective 2, identify the threat. Objective 3, neutralize it. The other members of the Brotherhood saw the change in him. His posture shifted, his jaw set. The easygoing helpfulness was gone, replaced by the unyielding resolve of a sergeant assuming command. Cole, the silent observer, had already moved to stand subtly between Lily and the road. Silas, having finished with the tire, now stood near the mother, a quiet, solid presence. They didn't know the specifics, but they knew their president had identified a threat. And their code was absolute. The child would be protected. the arrival of a nondescript sedan pulled the world back into real time. It crunched to a halt behind the row of motorcycles, and a man got out. He was in his late 40s, with a soft, doughy physique, wearing a polo shirt and khaki pants. He had a practiced, friendly smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lily made a sound, a tiny, choked gasp, and tried to shrink into herself, gathering the spilled contents of her bag with frantic, clumsy fingers. "Sarah, Lily, everything all right here?" the man called out, his voice a smooth, concerned baritone. He gestured toward the bikers. I saw the car and all this commotion. I was worried. Sarah's relief was palpable. "Mr. Abernathy, thank goodness, we had a flat, and these gentlemen were kind enough to help." Bear watched the man, Mr. Abernathy, as he approached. He saw the way his gaze swept over the bikers with a flicker of annoyance before settling on Lily. He saw the way Lily flinched when he said her name. He saw everything. Mr. Abernathy was the man from the drawing. The helper. Bear straightened up to his full height, placing himself squarely between Abernathy and the child. He didn't speak. He just stood there, a mountain of leather and quiet intention. The air crackled with unspoken challenge. Abernathy's smile tightened. "Well, that's very neighborly of you fellas, but I can take it from here. Come on, Lilybug," he said, using a cloying pet name that made Bear's teeth ache. "Let's get you and your mom home." He reached out a hand toward the little girl. It was a simple, friendly gesture, but Bear saw the shadow of it. He saw the grasping tendril from the drawing. He took one small step forward, blocking the path. "She's not going with you," Bear said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. It was the voice he had used to send men into battle, the voice that left no room for argument. The intersection of these two worlds, Lily's silent fear and the Brotherhood's unwavering code, had just ignited a fuse. The quiet roadside was no longer just the scene of a flat tire. It was now a line drawn in the sand. Mr. Abernathy, the respected community leader, had just run into an immovable object, and the truth, so carefully hidden, was about to be dragged, kicking and screaming, into the light. Mr. Abernathy's smile faltered, replaced by a mask of polite confusion. "I'm sorry, I don't think I understand. I'm a friend of the family. I run the youth center where Lily stays after school. Her mother knows me." He looked at Sarah, expecting her to validate his authority, to smooth over this awkward and unexpected resistance. Sarah, caught between the intimidating presence of the bikers and the familiar face of a trusted community figure, looked flustered. "He's right," she said, her voice uncertain. "Mr. Abernathy he's our neighbor. He looks out for Lily." Bear did not take his eyes off Abernathy. He had learned long ago that the most dangerous predators were the ones that wore the sheep's clothing of respectability. He had seen the drawing. He had seen the fear in Lily's eyes. That was the only testimony he needed. "The girl is scared," Bear said, his voice flat and even. "She doesn't want to go with you." Abernathy's affable facade began to crack, a hairline fracture of irritation showing through. He let out a short, condescending laugh. "Oh, Lily is just shy. She gets overwhelmed easily. And let's be honest," he said, gesturing at the silent, leather-clad men surrounding them. "This is a rather intimidating scene for a little girl. You're frightening her." He was attempting to reframe the situation, to paint Bear and his men as the source of the child's distress. It was a clever manipulation, and it might have worked on anyone else. But Bear was an expert in psychological warfare. He didn't rise to the bait. He remained perfectly calm, a granite wall of resolve. Behind him, Lily had managed to stuff the notebook and her other belongings back into her backpack, zipping it shut with trembling fingers. She clutched it to her chest like a shield. Her small act of defiance, of reclaiming her fortress, seemed to give her a sliver of courage. "I want to stay with my mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible. But in the charged silence it rang out like a bell. Abernathy's face darkened. The friendly mask slipped completely, revealing a flash of raw, possessive anger, before it was quickly replaced by a look of paternalistic concern. "Now, Lily, don't be difficult. Your mother is tired. Let's not make a scene." He took a step forward, intending to take her by the arm. Cole, the silent observer, shifted his weight. It was a minute movement, but it placed him directly in Abernathy's path. He didn't say a word. He just looked at him. Abernathy stopped cold. Being blocked by one giant biker was an obstacle. Being blocked by two was a declaration. "There's a problem here," Bear stated simply. He turned his head slightly to address Sarah, his voice softening but losing none of its authority. "Ma'am, your daughter is trying to tell you something. You need to listen." Sarah looked from Bear's unyielding face to Abernathy's strained smile, and finally to her own daughter, who was hiding behind the biker's legs, peering out with wide, frightened eyes. For the first time, Sarah was not just seeing a shy child. She was seeing a terrified one. The memory of the past few months clicked into place. Lily's increasing quietness, her insistence on taking that backpack everywhere, her sudden aversion to going to the youth center. Sarah had dismissed it all as a part of her grief, her adjustment to a new town. But now, seeing her cower from the man who was supposed to be her safe harbor, a cold dread began to seep into her heart. "What is it, sweetie?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "What's wrong?" Lily just shook her head, burying her face in the back of Bear's leather vest. She couldn't say it. The words were trapped behind a wall of fear. Abernathy saw he was losing control. He decided to play his trump card, public authority. He pulled out his phone. "That's it. I'm calling the police. A dozen vagrants are harassing a woman and her child on the side of the road. We'll see how you like explaining this to the sheriff." "Good," Bear said without a moment's hesitation. "You should." He pulled out his own phone and dialed 911. "My name is Marcus Volkov," he said into the phone, his voice clear and steady. "I'm on Highway 17, about 5 miles east of Northwood. I'm with a group of motorcyclists who stopped to help a woman, Sarah Miller, and her daughter Lily with a flat tire. A man has arrived on scene, identifying himself as a Mr. Abernathy. The child is exhibiting extreme signs of fear and distress in his presence. We are concerned for her safety and are requesting an officer to mediate." He had not only called Abernathy's bluff, he had expertly framed the situation, shifting the narrative from bikers harassing a family to citizens concerned for a child's welfare. Abernathy's face went pale. This was not how it was supposed to go. He was the one who controlled the narrative. He was the good guy, the pillar of the community. The tense standoff held for the 15 minutes it took for a patrol car to arrive. The sons of Odin stood like statues, a silent, protective circle around Lily and her mother. Abernathy paced, his friendly demeanor completely gone, replaced by a simmering, impotent rage. Sarah knelt by Lily, murmuring soft, comforting words, her mind racing, trying to piece together the terrible puzzle that was unfolding before her. When Deputy Miller, a man with a tired face and a deep-seated skepticism for all of humanity, arrived, he saw exactly what Abernathy had wanted him to see: a group of intimidating bikers surrounding a civilian car. His hand rested instinctively on his service weapon. "All right, what's going on here?" he demanded, his eyes scanning the scene. Abernathy immediately stepped forward, his voice dripping with relief. "Thank God you're here, officer. These men, they wouldn't let me take my friend and her daughter home. They're terrifying this poor child." Miller looked at Bear. "Is that true?" Bear simply gestured with his chin toward Lily, who was still hiding. "Look at the girl, Deputy. She's not afraid of us. She's afraid of him." He then looked at Sarah. "Ma'am, I suggest you show the deputy your daughter's notebook." Sarah hesitated for a second, then nodded. She gently coaxed the backpack from Lily's arms. Her hands shook as she unzipped it and pulled out the spiral-bound notebook. She had never looked inside it before. She had respected it as Lily's private world. She opened it, and her breath caught in her throat. Page after page was filled with drawings of the man with the shadowy hands, always in the small windowless office, always with the door closed. With a trembling hand, she gave the notebook to Deputy Miller. He took it, his expression shifting from annoyed to professionally curious. He flipped through the pages, his brow furrowing. He wasn't a psychologist, but he had been a cop for 20 years. He knew what a child's cry for help looked like. This was it. He looked up from the drawings, his gaze hard and assessing, and fixed it on Mr. Abernathy. The power dynamic on the roadside had just shifted, decisively and irrevocably. The truth had begun to surface, and it was uglier than anyone had imagined. Deputy Miller closed the notebook. A grin set to his jaw. He had seen enough domestic disputes and custody battles to recognize the subtle currents of manipulation and fear. The drawings were not definitive proof of a crime, but they were powerful evidence of a child's profound distress. Coupled with Lily's visible terror and the unwavering, disciplined calm of the bikers, the narrative Abernathy was trying to sell was falling apart. "Mr. Abernathy," Miller said, his tone now devoid of any deference, "I'm going to need you to step back to your vehicle and wait for me there." "Wait, this is ridiculous," Abernathy sputtered, his face flushing with indignation. "I'm the victim here. I'm a respected member of this community." "That may be," Miller said, his voice as hard as gravel. "But right now, you're part of an investigation. Go to your car." The unspoken threat hung in the air. Miller was no longer asking. Abernathy shot a venomous glare at Bear, then turned and stomped back to his sedan, slamming the door. Miller knelt down to Lily's level, his movements slow and deliberate. He held out the notebook. "This is yours, isn't it?" Lily, still partially hidden behind Bear, gave a tiny nod. "You're a very good artist," Miller said gently. "Can you tell me about this man you drew? The helper?" Lily looked at her mother, then at Bear, then back at the deputy. She took a deep breath, and in a small, wavering voice, she spoke. "He calls me Little Sparrow. He makes me stay in his office. He closes the door." Each sentence was a small stone dropped into a deep well. His hands have shadows. The simplicity and honesty of her words struck Miller with the force of a physical blow. He had children of his own. He stood up, his face a mask of cold fury. He walked over to Sarah. "Ma'am, I need you and your daughter to come down to the station. We need to have a talk with a child advocacy specialist. It's important." Sarah, tears now streaming down her face, nodded numbly. The pieces were fitting together, forming a picture of horror she had been blind to. Her guilt was a crushing weight. "How could I not see?" she whispered to no one in particular. Bear placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You're seeing now. That's what matters." He looked at Miller. "They can follow us. We'll provide an escort to the station." Miller considered it for a moment. Protocol said he should separate the parties, but instinct told him these men were not a threat. They were the reason this truth was coming to light. They were guardians. "All right," he conceded. "Follow me." The drive to the Northwood police station was a surreal procession. Miller's patrol car led, followed by Sarah's dented sedan, which was in turn flanked by the 10 motorcycles of the Sons of Odin. They moved as one, a rolling fortress of protection around the small car, carrying a mother and daughter whose world had just been torn apart. They pulled into the station's parking lot, and the bikers dismounted, forming a silent, watchful perimeter. They didn't come inside. They just stood there, their presence a clear, unambiguous statement. We are here. We are watching. This will be handled correctly. Inside, the process began. A social worker named Maria was brought in, a woman with a kind face and years of experience in drawing out the stories children were too scared to tell. She and Lily sat in a quiet room with comfortable chairs and a box of crayons. Sarah and Miller watched through a one-way mirror. With gentle prompting, and with the aid of her notebook, Lily began to talk. She described the windowless office, the way Mr. Abernathy's voice got low and quiet, the questions he asked about her life at home, the way he made her feel cold and sticky inside. She never described an explicit act of physical abuse, but she painted a detailed, chilling portrait of methodical psychological grooming. Detective Miller, who had taken over the case from the deputy, felt a growing sickness in his stomach. Abernathy was smart. He operated in the gray areas, his actions just shy of anything that would leave a physical mark, creating a wall of plausible deniability. He preyed on vulnerable children from broken homes, kids who were less likely to be believed, whose parents were too overwhelmed to notice the subtle signs. While Lily was talking, Miller started making calls. He ran a background check on Charles Abernathy. It came back clean, just as he expected, but then he started digging into the history of the Northwood Community Youth Center. He found that over the past 5 years there had been 2 formal complaints filed against Abernathy by parents. Both were vague, inappropriate comments, making my child feel uncomfortable. Both had been investigated internally by the center's board of directors, a group of Abernathy's friends and business associates, and both had been dismissed as misunderstandings. The families who complained had quietly pulled their children from the program, and in both cases, moved out of town within the year. A pattern was emerging. Miller then called Ms. Albright, Lily's teacher. He asked her if she had noticed anything unusual about Lily's behavior. Ms. Albright was quiet for a moment, then confessed. "She's so withdrawn," the teacher said, her voice full of concern. "And she's always drawing in that notebook. Once I saw a picture she drew. It was disturbing. A man with a big smile and scary hands. I asked her about it, and she just tore the page out and wouldn't speak for the rest of the day. I made a note of it. I should have done more." Miller assured her she was doing more now. Her testimony corroborated Lily's story, adding, "Another layer of credibility. The gears of justice, so often rusted shut by bureaucracy and disbelief, were slowly beginning to turn. And outside, the Sons of Odin waited, their patience as endless as the road. They were a living reminder to everyone in that station that this time, this little girl would not be dismissed. This time, someone was paying attention. The evidence was no longer just a child's drawing. It was becoming a case. The presence of the Sons of Odin outside the police station did not go unnoticed. At first, it was a curiosity. Then, as the hours wore on and the sun began to set, it became a statement. They stood by their bikes, not speaking, not menacing, but their collective stillness was more potent than any threat. They were a silent, leather-clad vigil. News travels fast in a small town like Northwood. People started driving by slowly, whispering. The owner of the diner across the street brought out a tray of coffee and sandwiches, which the bikers accepted with quiet, grateful nods. Inside, Detective Miller was building his case brick by brick. He convinced Sarah to let him look at her phone records. They found a series of texts from Abernathy that on their own seemed innocuous. "Just checking in on my little sparrow. Let me know if you're running late. I'm happy to keep Lily company." But in the new context, they read like a predator tracking his prey. The pattern of contact was obsessive, far beyond the normal communication of an after-school caregiver. The next morning, armed with Lily's detailed testimony, the corroboration from Miss Albright, and the evidence of the previous complaints, Miller obtained a warrant to search Abernathy's office at the youth center. He arrived with 2 uniformed officers to find the center operating as usual. Abernathy, looking haggard but defiant, met them at the door. "This is harassment, Detective," he hissed, trying to keep his voice low so the children wouldn't hear. "You are disrupting a vital community service based on the fantasy of a troubled little girl." "Then you won't mind if we look around," Miller said, handing him the warrant. The office was just as Lily had described it. Small, cluttered, and with no windows. At first glance, it seemed perfectly normal. But Miller, guided by the details from Lily's interview, knew what to look for. He found a small, almost invisible lock installed on the outside of the office door, the kind that could only be operated with a key. It was an old, non-standard edition. Then, in a locked filing cabinet, they found something deeply disturbing. It was a collection of files, one for each of the special children he had mentored over the years. These weren't official records. They contained handwritten notes about the children's family situations, their fears, their schedules. And tucked into several of the files were small, personal items: a hair ribbon, a single mitten, a photograph. Trophies. Lily's file was on top. Inside was a pencil she had dropped one day, the one with the unicorn eraser. When news of the search warrant and the files leaked, the town fractured. The community board that oversaw the youth center immediately suspended Abernathy, pending the investigation. But publicly they defended him as a man of unimpeachable character. A vocal group of parents who relied on the center rallied to his defense, accusing the police of a witch hunt instigated by dangerous bikers. They held a small but loud rally outside the town hall, holding signs that read, "Support Mr. A" and "Don't believe the lies." But a different, quieter movement was also taking shape. Ms. Albright, galvanized by her conversation with Miller, organized a meeting for parents at the elementary school. She shared her concerns, not just about Lily, but about the system that allowed a man like Abernathy to operate with so little oversight. The parents of the 2 families who had previously filed complaints were tracked down in their new towns. Emboldened by the fact that they were no longer alone, they agreed to give official statements to the police, describing similar patterns of grooming and psychological manipulation involving their own children. The Sons of Odin became the unlikely symbols of this movement for justice. They escorted Sarah and Lily to and from their meetings with prosecutors and therapists, their motorcycles a rumbling shield against the prying eyes of the media and the angry glares of Abernathy's supporters. They didn't speak to reporters. They didn't engage with the protesters. Their mission was singular: protect the child. Their quiet, unwavering presence gave courage to others. One evening, a woman whose son had attended the center years ago approached Silas as he stood watch outside the motel where Sarah and Lily were staying. "My boy. He used to have nightmares after spending time with that man," she confessed, her voice shaking. "He would never tell me what they were about. I just thought he was sensitive. I pulled him out, but I never said anything. I was afraid people would think I was a hysterical mother." Silas just nodded. "You can say something now," he said, his voice gentle. "The detective's number's on a card inside the station. They're listening now." The woman left, and an hour later, Miller received another call. The trickle of evidence was becoming a flood. The public reckoning was not just about Charles Abernathy anymore. It was about all the times people had looked away, all the small, unsettling moments they had dismissed, all the children who had been taught to be quiet. Lily's one small act of courage, of packing a bag and drawing her truth, had held a mirror up to the entire town, and the reflection was forcing everyone to see the shadows they had allowed to grow in their midst. The wheels of justice, once set in motion, ground forward with deliberate force. The district attorney, sensing the shift in public opinion and armed with a mounting pile of evidence, formally charged Charles Abernathy with multiple counts of child endangerment and unlawful imprisonment. The trial became the single focus of the town of Northwood. The courtroom was packed every day, a stark physical representation of the community's divide. On one side sat Abernathy's staunch supporters, church friends, and board members who saw him as a martyr. On the other side sat a growing coalition of concerned parents, teachers, and community members, with the silent, imposing figures of the sons of Odin occupying the back 2 rows, their leather vests a stark contrast to the courtroom's polished wood. They were there every single day, a promise kept. Abernathy's defense was built on his reputation. His lawyer painted him as a benevolent, misunderstood public servant, and Lily as a deeply troubled, imaginative child lashing out from the trauma of losing her father. They tried to portray the sons of Odin as a menacing biker gang who had coerced and manipulated a vulnerable family, but the prosecution, led by a sharp, empathetic ADA named Rachel Santos, systematically dismantled that narrative. She put Ms. Albright on the stand, who testified about Lily's behavioral changes and the disturbing drawing she had seen. She put the parents from the previous complaints on the stand, who told stories hauntingly similar to Lily's. She put Detective Miller on the stand, who detailed the discovery of the external lock on the office door and the secret files filled with trophies taken from the children. The most powerful moment of the trial, however, came when Lily testified. To protect her from the trauma of facing Abernathy directly, she was allowed to speak from a separate room via closed-circuit television, with Maria, the child advocacy specialist, by her side. On the large screen in the courtroom, the jury saw not a troubled, fantasy-prone child, but a small, serious, and remarkably composed little girl. Santos asked her simple, direct questions. "Lily, can you tell us about Mr. Abernathy's office?" "It was small," Lily said, her voice clear. There were no windows. The door made a clicking sound when he closed it. "And what would happen in the office?" "He would ask me to be his helper. He would tell me secrets. He said I was his little sparrow and that sparrows knew how to keep secrets." "What kind of secrets, Lily?" Lily looked down at her hands for a moment. "He said my mom was sad and tired and that she might leave me. He said he would be the one to take care of me if she did. He said I had to be good for him, or he would be sad too." A wave of sickness rolled through the courtroom. Abernathy's strategy was clear. He was isolating her, breaking down her trust in her only parent, making himself her sole source of emotional security, a classic, insidious grooming technique. The final question from Santos was the most devastating. "Lily, you drew pictures of Mr. Abernathy with long, shadow hands. Can you tell the jury why you drew him that way?" Lily looked directly into the camera, her gaze unwavering. "Because that's what they felt like," she said simply. "Even when he was smiling, his hands felt like they were reaching out of the dark to grab me." There was no cross-examination. Even Abernathy's lawyer knew it would be a disaster. The jury was out for less than 2 hours. The verdict was guilty on all counts. As the court officer led a pale, stunned Abernathy away in handcuffs, A quiet, collective sigh of relief went through one side of the courtroom. In the back, Bear just nodded once, a slow, deliberate gesture of finality. Justice, for this one child, had been delivered. The conviction of Charles Abernathy sent shockwaves through Northwood and beyond. It was a brutal wake-up call, a testament to the fact that evil often wears the most respectable masks. But the story did not end with the closing of a prison door. The courage of one little girl and the intervention of an unlikely group of guardians sparked a movement of lasting change, a series of reforms designed to ensure that no other child would have to pack an escape bag. The Northwood Community Youth Center was shut down immediately following the verdict. For months, its doors remained locked, a silent monument to the town's collective failure. But Ms. Albright, along with a newly formed Parent-Teacher Association, refused to let it die. They petitioned the town council, not just to reopen it, but to fundamentally remake it. They spent months rewriting the bylaws, drafting new policies, and fundraising. The result was the Sparrow Center, named in honor of the little girl who had found her voice. The new center had a board of directors composed of parents, teachers, and child safety experts. It implemented what became known locally as Lily's Law, a set of stringent, non-negotiable safety protocols. Every employee and volunteer had to undergo an exhaustive background check, including psychological screening. A two-adult rule was strictly enforced, ensuring no child was ever left alone with a single staff member. The building itself was redesigned. The small, windowless office was torn down, replaced by an open-plan administrative area with large glass walls. Security cameras were installed in all common areas. The center became a model for child safety, with other towns sending representatives to study their new system. The sons of Odin, who had quietly faded back into the background after the trial, were approached by the new board. They were asked, formally, to be part of the center's advisory council on security. Bear politely declined an official role, stating that they weren't committee people. Instead, he made a simple promise. The Brotherhood established the Odin's Watch, an informal volunteer network. They provided free safety assessments for schools and daycares in the county. They started a fund to help families in crisis, providing money for things like secure housing, therapy, or legal aid. Their patch, once a symbol of fear for some, slowly became a symbol of protection in the region. When a son of Odin rode by, people no longer saw an outlaw. They saw a guardian. Detective Miller was promoted to captain. He used his new position to overhaul how the department handled child endangerment cases. He mandated specialized training for all officers on how to interview children, how to spot the subtle signs of grooming, and how to build a case based on psychological evidence, not just physical proof. He often used the story of Lily's notebook in his training sessions as a powerful example of how truth can be found in the most unexpected places. The ripples spread even further. The state legislature, citing the Northwood case, passed a bill that strengthened background check requirements for anyone working with children and closed legal loopholes that had allowed previous complaints against people like Abernathy to be buried by internal reviews. The law required that any formal complaint of inappropriate conduct involving a minor be automatically reported to both law enforcement and a state-level child protective agency, regardless of an internal investigation's outcome. For Sarah and Lily, the changes were more personal and profound. With the support of the Odin's Watch Fund, Sarah was able to take time off from her grueling nursing schedule to focus on healing with her daughter. They both entered therapy, learning to navigate the complex landscape of trauma and guilt. The Brotherhood helped them find a new apartment, a small house with a big backyard and plenty of sunny windows. The members of the club became a constant, steady presence in their lives. Silas taught Lily how to change the oil in a car. Cole, the silent one, built her a magnificent treehouse in the backyard. Bear became the grandfather figure she had lost, teaching her how to fish and telling her stories that had nothing to do with war and everything to do with honor and courage. They were a strange, cobbled-together family, bound not by blood, but by a shared commitment to keeping the shadows at bay. The world had failed Lily once, but now a new, stronger world was being built around her, one policy, one law, and one act of kindness at a time. A year passed. The seasons turned, washing the town of Northwood with the vibrant colors of autumn, the quiet white of winter, and the bright, hopeful green of spring. The Sparrow Center was thriving, its hallways filled with the sounds of laughter and play. The old fear was gone, replaced by a new culture of vigilance and open communication. The changes that had once seemed so radical were now simply the way things were done. The town was safer, more aware, and more connected. For Lily, the world was no longer shrinking. It was expanding. She was no longer the quiet new girl at school. She had friends, she joined the soccer team, and she discovered a love for painting. Her canvases filled with bright, swirling colors. She still had her purple backpack, but its contents had changed. The flashlight and emergency crackers were gone, replaced by library books, a half-finished drawing of a horse, and a small smooth stone that Bear had given her for good luck. It was no longer an escape kit, it was just a backpack. One warm Saturday afternoon, the Sons of Odin hosted a barbecue in the park. It had become an annual tradition, a fundraiser for the Odin's Watch Fund. The entire town seemed to be there. Families grilled burgers, children played on the swings, and the deep, friendly rumble of the bikers' voices mixed with the sounds of a local band playing on a small stage. It was a scene of perfect, ordinary peace. Lily sat at a picnic table with Bear, her small feet swinging beneath the bench. She was showing him her latest sketchbook. The pages were filled with drawings, but these were different. There were no shadowy hands, no windowless rooms. She had drawn pictures of her mother smiling, of Miss Albright reading a story to a class, of Detective Miller in his uniform, looking tall and proud. On the last page was a new drawing. It was a picture of a large, bearded bear wearing a leather vest, holding the hand of a little girl. They were standing under a big, smiling sun. Both of them were smiling too. "That's a good one, little sparrow," Bear said, his gruff voice thick with emotion. He still called her that, but the name had changed. It was no longer a name of secrecy and fear. It was a name of affection, of strength. A sparrow was small, yes, but it could fly. Lily tore the page carefully from the sketchbook and handed it to him. "For you," she said, "to keep." Bear took the drawing, his large calloused hand surprisingly gentle. He folded it carefully and tucked it into the inside pocket of his vest, placing it over his heart. "I'll keep it forever," he promised. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the park, the Brotherhood prepared to leave. They mounted their bikes, the familiar ritual of zipping jackets and settling helmets a comforting rhythm. Sarah and Lily stood nearby, watching them. Before he put on his helmet, Bear walked over to Lily. He knelt down so they were eye to eye. "You remember the code?" he asked her softly. Lily nodded, her expression serious. "Be brave, be kind, and always help someone who has fallen." "That's my girl," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He stood up, gave Sarah a respectful nod, and then climbed onto his Harley. With a synchronized roar, the engines came to life. They pulled out of the park and onto the open road, a line of guardians riding into the fading light. Lily watched them go until they were just a distant rumble, a promise on the horizon. She looked up at her mother, who wrapped a warm, steady arm around her shoulders. The world was vast and full of uncertainty, but it was no longer a scary place. It was a place where heroes rode motorcycles, where courage came in the form of a child's drawing, and where a chosen family could build a fortress of love and protection strong enough to keep all the shadows away. The sun set, the streetlights came on, and in the small house with the sunny windows, a little girl slept soundly, safe and finally, truly home. The promise had been kept.